Okay, so we were just about to cover the weighting on the cheeks. The cheeks, it's so subtle that it's hard to see even. It's just this dark gray area. And the reason it's so subtle is because the cheek joints generally are going to be scaled. And if we want there to be more displacement on a joint that's going to be using scaling, then all we have to do is increase that scale value more. And we don't have to put too much weighting information on that joint. And we don't want to put too much weighting information on that joint because we need the majority of this skin in this area to follow our upper and lower jaw joints. Okay, so that should be very subtle. When sculpting the cheek, just so you know, what I did is I turned off the color feedback in the display section of the Paint Weights tool. So I turned off Show Wireframe, and I turned off color feedback, and then I scaled that joint. So let me switch to that. I scaled this up and looked in a mirror, or had one of your classmates actually puff his cheeks for me. And I weighted this by looking at someone. And because the thing you need to remember when you're doing all this weight painting is you're very literally resculpting the face. Okay? And so the weight map, it doesn't matter how smooth and nice it looks. What matters is the shape that you're getting from it. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, most of the time, if it's working well, it will be smooth. It'll blend around nicely. But anyway, there's that. So set that back to 1. Go back to my tool settings, turn on my color feedback and wireframe, turn off my joints. Okay, now, so that's the cheek. Then we've got the ears. For the ears, I ended up having to steal that was on the head base joint, the weighting information for the ears was. So I had to unlock not just this joint, but also the head base joint. And on the ears, I just tried to get it so I could rotate it out and have it look like a decent transition, whatever that means for an ear. Because really, the ears aren't going to change much, ever, unless it's really cartoon, like Looney Tunes sort of cartoon. Anyway, but you do want it to look nice if the animator decides to do that or decides to scale it up. It should work. So I guess it's worth scaling. Real quick to show you. So there it is, huge Dumbo ears. But the transition's actually pretty good, even when it's scaled up like that. So I'll reset that. Reset my rotations. Okay. Just a few more joints to go. Set it down. We don't need the brow. There's an ear. Okay, now the eyes. So for now, all I did was weight the main eye joint. So the eye right joint. The eyeball doesn't have any control, and the eyelid down and the eyelid up don't have any weighting information yet. Just did the main eye joint. And it needs to control enough. This needs to control everything that the eye should control, plus a tiny bit more than that. And the reason we do a tiny bit more is because we're going to steal from this joint we're going to actually need to create one more eye joint that can, when the eyeball rotates really far to the left or to the right or up and down, down doesn't really affect it so much. But if you go up, left, or right, it actually moves the skin around the eye a little bit. Okay, and that's typically what we call fleshy eyes. And that should be used even in a cartoon. Okay, because the subtle things like that are what we pick up on to know if a character is really straining to look hard. Okay, so to test this one's kind of a difficult one. But to test this one, I would rotate it up, and I'd try to get rotated up about as far as I think that bottom eyelid should ever go. That's about halfway up the eye, and see if I can't get that to be nice and smooth. Okay, and then you want to make sure that things like this is the inside of the eyelid. This is what's going to make sure it's you can't see in between the eyeball and the eyelid. So you need an inside eyelid, and you want to make sure that doesn't show up. And so mine doesn't show up until after that. If I rotate it higher up than that. Okay, and then I weighted this so that it looked semi-pleasant with it rotated up. Okay, and then I rotated it down, and I did the same thing. And I weighted all this stuff on the top eyelid and towards the brow so that it looked nice and it made a decent transition. And then eventually I'll be stilling from these for the eyelids. Okay. Also, I moved it left and right just a tiny bit to see if I can manipulate that skin in the corner of the eyes for those hard looks to the left and to the right. Okay, so I deemed this good enough. You reset those rotations. Okay, so that's what I ended up for the eye. Okay. Now for the jaw up, it's also a little bit tricky, especially because it's not how things work in reality. But typically what you want this to do is to control a little bit of geometry in the cheeks and a lot in the upper lip. Okay, and then when it rotates, it's not going to move the nose for now, but it allows you to kind of lift that top lip up. Okay, do a little bit more of a reveal on those teeth. Eventually, the nose will move a tiny bit with that also, if you so desire, which I think I do, because it's kind of a cartoon move anyhow. And we'll do that by controlling the nose joint itself, and it will translate that nose up when this upper jaw gets rotated up. You can also take it down a little bit. Okay, so while you're watching me go over this, what you should notice is that, to the best of my knowledge, all of these joints, when they're moving around, my mesh, the topology of my mesh stays pretty nice. And you're going to want to do that, especially on these earlier joints. If you don't control it on these earlier joints, it'll continue to get more and more messy as we, start pulling and subdividing the weighting information to the more isolated joints. Anyway, that's